It all started on a rainy afternoon in Washington, D.C., the kind of day that felt heavy with the weight of secrets. The political elite were busy with their usual manipulations, smoke-filled backroom deals, and endless posturing. But the day's most significant event was about to take place in a small, unassuming press room. Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman from Hawaii, stood at the podium, a calm yet undeniable intensity in her eyes. Her reputation as a fierce and principled voice had always set her apart from the establishment, but today, she was about to drop a bombshell that would send shockwaves through the political landscape. "Enough is enough," she began, her voice steady but cutting through the air like a knife. "Hillary Clinton has spent years running a political machine that has no regard for the truth, for the people, or for the future of our country." The room went silent. You could feel the energy shift as every journalist in the room leaned in. This was no ordinary statement. This was the opening salvo of a battle that would forever change the course of American politics. Tulsi paused, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was no stranger to controversy, but this was something different. This was the culmination of years of watching the Clintons manipulate the system to protect their power. "Today," Tulsi continued, "I'm calling out Hillary Clinton for her role in the corruption, lies, and deceit that have poisoned our political system. This is about more than just me, it's about every single person who has been lied to, misled, and used by the political elite for far too long." Her words stung, but the room was still trying to process what she had just said. This wasn't the usual partisan bickering, this was a full-throated attack on the very heart of the Democratic establishment. Tulsi's eyes never wavered from the camera as she spoke. "This ends now. It's over." And with that, she turned, walking out of the press room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. But this was just the beginning. The news hit like a thunderclap. Within minutes, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags like #Tulsi vs Hillary and #It'sOver began trending worldwide. Analysts scrambled to dissect every word Tulsi had said, trying to understand the full implications of her unprecedented attack on one of the most powerful figures in American politics. But as the day wore on, something remarkable began to happen. The usual defenders of Hillary Clinton, her loyal media allies, her political backers, began to shift in tone. Instead of outright denial, many of them started questioning the status quo. Some even speculated that maybe Tulsi was onto something. The old guard, it seemed, was starting to fracture. Tulsi's supporters, meanwhile, were in a state of jubilant euphoria. They had long viewed her as the anti-establishment voice that would stand up to the political corruption that had run rampant in Washington for decades. And now, with one bold move, she had called out Hillary Clinton for what they had all long suspected: Hillary wasn't just part of the system, she was the system. Hillary Clinton, however, was not one to back down. Her team quickly released a statement in response, dismissing Tulsi's allegations as nothing more than a political stunt. But the damage had been done. The public perception was shifting. The long-held myth of Clinton's invulnerability was starting to crack. Behind closed doors, though, the stakes were even higher. Clinton's allies, including powerful figures in the DNC, were scrambling. They knew the game had changed, and they were worried. There were whispers that Hillary might be forced to respond more aggressively, to silence Tulsi once and for all. But that was exactly what Tulsi was counting on. She knew the next move was crucial. The question now was, would Hillary try to play the victim? Would she double down on her power? Or would she crumble under the weight of the truth? Whatever happened, Tulsi had already won. She had exposed a crack in the armor, and there was no going back. Her next steps would be critical. The battle was just beginning. Hillary Clinton wasn't known for backing down, and those who underestimated her were often left in the dust. She had weathered scandals, attacks, and betrayals that would have shattered lesser politicians, but Tulsi Gabbard's public takedown had her rattled. Behind closed doors in her private office, the strategy session began in full force. Her top advisors, including a mix of former campaign managers and DNC power brokers, gathered to devise a response. They knew the narrative Tulsi had set would not easily fade. Tulsi had tapped into something primal, the distrust and dissatisfaction of everyday Americans who felt abandoned by the political elites. Let's not be naive, one of her senior advisors, a sharp woman with years of political experience, said. Tulsi's attack wasn't just about Hillary Clinton. It was about the entire political system, our system. If we don't hit back hard, the public will think we're admitting guilt. The room hummed with tension. Hillary was silent, her fingers steepled in front of her face as she absorbed every word. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but laced with the kind of steely determination that had carried her through countless political battles. We go on offense, she said, her eyes narrowing. It's time to expose Tulsi for what she really is, a tool of the Russian agenda. A wave of shock rippled through the room. The idea was bold, even reckless, but Hillary's team knew that if they were going to turn the tables, they would have to make Tulsi the enemy in a way that stuck. The strategy was set. They would claim that Tulsi had been actively working with foreign powers to destabilize American democracy, casting doubt on her integrity and questioning her loyalty. After all, they had the resources and connections to plant doubts, and it wasn't the first time someone had used the Russian asset accusation to destroy an adversary's credibility. The message went out swiftly. A series of coordinated news stories began to surface, each one claiming that Tulsi had met with foreign agents during her trips abroad, and that she had received mysterious donations from overseas sources. The media ate it up, amplifying the narrative that Tulsi was more than just a rogue politician, she was a puppet of foreign interests. But Tulsi wasn't going to let this narrative stand unchallenged. She went on the attack immediately, hitting back with a fury that stunned even her most ardent supporters. "This is exactly what I was talking about," she tweeted. "When you stand up to the corrupt elites, they don't try to beat you on the issues. They attack your character. They'll lie, manipulate, and twist the truth to distract from the real problem. But I won't back down. It's time to expose them for who they really are." The fight had entered its next phase, and it was clear that both sides were digging in for a battle that would not only define their political futures but also reshape the American political landscape forever. Hillary Clinton's campaign to discredit Tulsi Gabbard went into overdrive. The media outlets that had long been friendly to Clinton's brand were now echoing the claims that Tulsi had been compromised by foreign powers. The DNC's deep-pocketed donors pulled strings behind the scenes, feeding stories to journalists and ensuring that the accusations would dominate the news cycle. One morning, Tulsi woke up to find a headline splashed across a major newspaper: "Tulsi Gabbard, the Kremlin's favorite politician." The article was a 5,000-word hit piece, filled with insinuations, half-truths, and carefully selected quotes that seemed to tie Tulsi's foreign trips to shady figures with links to Russia. The piece cited unnamed sources, weaving a story that made Tulsi look like a willing puppet for foreign interference. Tulsi's phone rang non-stop as her advisors tried to keep up with the barrage. But despite the negative press, she didn't flinch. She wasn't just running for office, she was running for the soul of the country. She called a press conference within hours, a calculated move to take control of the narrative. Standing at the podium, Tulsi looked every bit the warrior she had become over the last few days. Her posture was confident, her voice steady, but beneath it, there was an undeniable fire. "Let's be clear," she began, addressing the packed room of reporters. "These attacks are nothing new. They've been used for years to silence anyone who dares to challenge the power of the establishment. They can't beat me on policy, so they smear my name and try to paint me as a foreign agent." Her words cut through the noise like a blade. The media had tried to frame her as a traitor, but Tulsi was taking control of the narrative. "These are baseless, unfounded attacks designed to distract from the real issue, the corruption that runs deep in our political system. They want to silence me because I've stood up against the wars, the profiteering, the lies. They want to distract you with these cheap smears instead of addressing the real problem facing this country, the people in power who don't care about you." Tulsi paused for effect, letting the words sink in. I've spent my career serving the people, not foreign powers. I've fought against the very forces that seek to divide us. And I'm not backing down now. The room was silent for a moment. Then, one of the reporters, not waiting for the press conference to end, asked a question that hung in the air like a challenge. But Tulsi, why didn't you denounce Russia when they tried to interfere in the 2016 election? Tulsi's eyes narrowed. She wasn't surprised by the question, it was a trap they'd set up for her. She had heard it before. Let's be clear about what's happening here, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. The very people accusing me of being a Russian asset are the same people who've turned a blind eye to the real threats to democracy, corporate money in politics, endless wars, and the erosion of our civil liberties. They don't care about the truth. They care about maintaining power. And I'm here to take that power back for the people. The room erupted in questions, but Tulsi had already made her point. She wasn't going to be bullied, and she wasn't going to let the smear campaign define her. As the press conference ended and Tulsi walked out, her supporters were already rallying around her. Social media exploded with hashtags like #TulsiIsNotAForeignAgent and #FightForTheTruth, a powerful counternarrative that was quickly gaining momentum. Tulsi had turned the tables. The establishment might have thought it could crush her with lies, but she had just taken the fight to the heart of the political machine. The battle was far from over, but it was clear that Tulsi Gabbard wasn't going down without one hell of a fight. Days turned into weeks, and the battle between Tulsi Gabbard and Hillary Clinton escalated into an all-out war. The media circus surrounding Tulsi's allegations of corruption and foreign influence didn't let up, but Tulsi was unyielding. She knew that the more attention she received, the stronger her message became. The establishment could try to tear her down, but she wasn't about to fall into their trap. Behind the scenes, Hillary's campaign was desperate. Her allies within the DNC had doubled down on their attack strategy, using every tool at their disposal. But despite their efforts to paint Tulsi as a threat to national security, the public wasn't buying it. Hillary's reputation, once invulnerable, was now under siege. Every smear only seemed to backfire. Then, one fateful evening, as the news was dominated by another round of heated debates and political maneuvering, Tulsi dropped her final bombshell. A press release came through at 9 p.m. that evening, just before the major news outlets went to air. The headline read, "Tulsi Gabbard exposes Hillary Clinton's ties to corporate lobbyists and foreign governments." In the release, Tulsi's team outlined a detailed investigation into Hillary's fundraising network and its ties to foreign interests, corporate lobbyists, and multinational organizations. The dossier was filled with documents, financial records, and even a list of shadowy meetings between Hillary's team and powerful foreign figures. The information was explosive, far more than anyone had expected. It was one thing to accuse Hillary of corruption, but this was a direct, meticulously researched attack that would be impossible to ignore. The public was stunned. As the story hit the front pages the following morning, the outrage grew. Voters began to connect the dots: Hillary's long-standing ties to corporate interests, her approval of foreign military interventions, and her penchant for cozying up to powerful, non-democratic regimes suddenly seemed far more sinister. It was the kind of information that could not be easily dismissed or discredited. For Hillary, it was a nightmare. Her team scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. The narrative had already shifted. The more they tried to defend her, the deeper she sank into the political quicksand. The media, once her ally, now began to question how much they had overlooked, how much they had let slip by. Tulsi's relentless pursuit of the truth had exposed the cracks in Hillary's empire, and the foundation was starting to crumble. On the day that Hillary was scheduled to speak at a major fundraising event in New York, Tulsi made her final move. In a fiery, impromptu speech outside the venue, Tulsi addressed the gathered crowd, knowing that the cameras were rolling. "This is what happens when you've spent your life enriching yourself and your friends at the expense of the people," she declared, her voice ringing clear and unwavering. "This is the face of the corruption that has held this country hostage for decades. It's time to stand up and demand better." It's time to end the reign of people like Hillary Clinton, who have used their power to manipulate, deceive, and sell out the American people. The response was immediate. The crowd erupted in applause. Tulsi had seized the moment. The support for her was overwhelming, and it wasn't just from her base, it was from a cross-section of frustrated Americans who had grown tired of the political elite's grip on power. Meanwhile, Hillary's event in New York was an absolute disaster. Several high-profile donors pulled their funding, and protesters gathered outside, chanting against her corruption. It became clear that the establishment's power could no longer shield her. The more they tried to spin the narrative, the more they exposed themselves as the very thing Tulsi had accused them of being, the corrupt, entrenched political class. It was over. The people had spoken, and the winds of change were blowing hard in Tulsi's direction. Hillary Clinton had been brought to the brink of political irrelevance, her legacy stained by the very corruption she had spent decades defending. As the dust settled, Tulsi Gabbard stood tall, victorious, but determined. She had fought not just for herself but for the future of a country that had long been trapped in the grip of political corruption. The real battle had only just begun, but Tulsi had proven that with truth, courage, and unwavering resolve, even the most powerful political figures could be brought to their knees. And with that, the world began to realize, it was over. In the wake of Tulsi Gabbard's victory, the political landscape of the United States had been permanently altered. What was once considered impossible, a challenge to the entrenched political establishment, had become the new reality. The old guard had been taken down, and Tulsi emerged as a champion for the people, a leader who wasn't afraid to confront the most powerful figures in the nation. The momentum Tulsi gained from her victory didn't fade, it only grew. Support poured in from all corners of the country, grassroots organizations, former political opponents, and even disillusioned members of the establishment. People who had once been skeptical of her rise now saw her as the figurehead of a new political movement, one that promised transparency, accountability, and a break from the old corrupt ways. However, this wasn't without its challenges. The political system was not going to roll over quietly. The corporate interests, lobbyists, and former allies of Hillary Clinton weren't going to relinquish power without a fight. Tulsi's critics were quick to label her a disruptor, a danger to the established order, and in some corners of Washington, whispers began about how to neutralize her before she could gain too much traction. Tulsi knew that the battle had only just begun. While the public had shifted in her favor, the forces she had stirred up were not easily defeated. She was now the focal point of every attack, every smear, and every desperate attempt to maintain the status quo. In an unprecedented move, Tulsi decided to take her fight directly to the people, bypassing the traditional political channels that had long been controlled by the establishment. She launched a new political party, called the People's Voice, aimed at providing an alternative to the duopoly of the Democratic and Republican parties. It was a bold, risky decision, but one that felt necessary if she was truly going to enact the sweeping change she promised. "The two-party system has failed us," she told a roaring crowd at her launch rally. "It's time for something different. It's time for a government that answers to the people, not the corporations, not the foreign powers, not the lobbyists. We are the ones who can rebuild this country, and together, we will do it." The launch of the People's Voice set off a political earthquake. Overnight, Tulsi became not just a political figure but a movement. Her words resonated with Americans across the ideological spectrum. Liberals who felt betrayed by the establishment, conservatives tired of the endless wars, and independents seeking an alternative to the status quo all found common ground in Tulsi's vision for a new, more honest form of governance. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, now a shadow of her former self, continued to navigate the fallout from Tulsi's devastating revelations. She struggled to retain any real influence, her reputation tarnished beyond repair. Her days as a central figure in American politics were numbered. Behind closed doors, the establishment figures who once stood by her side began distancing themselves, sensing the shift in power. But Tulsi wasn't concerned with the fallout from her victory over Clinton. She was focused on something bigger, transforming the political system itself. The next few years would be crucial as she tried to establish her new party and mobilize the growing army of disillusioned voters who had rallied to her cause. The first test came during the midterm elections. The People's Voice candidates, many of whom were first-time politicians, ran in races across the country. They faced enormous opposition from both the Republicans and Democrats, who saw them as a serious threat to their power. The media, which had once been so eager to tear Tulsi down, now attempted to minimize her party's influence, claiming that they were too inexperienced or too radical to make a real impact. But as the election results rolled in, it became clear that the People's Voice had made an undeniable impact. While they didn't win a majority, they had succeeded in taking seats from both the Democrats and Republicans, forcing the old parties to take notice. The political establishment could no longer ignore Tulsi's growing movement. As the years passed, Tulsi's influence continued to grow. She became a symbol of resistance, not just to the political elites but to the global corporate interests that had fueled endless wars and contributed to economic inequality. Her vision of a government that served the people was gaining ground, and the establishment was on its heels, scrambling to keep up. Tulsi had done what no one thought possible. She had dismantled the old political order and replaced it with something far more radical, far more inclusive, and far more accountable to the people. The era of political dynasties and corruption was over. A new day had dawned, and the country would never be the same. For Tulsi, the journey was far from over. But as she stood on the steps of the Capitol, looking out over the sea of supporters who had come to see the future unfold, she knew one thing for sure: it was just the beginning. The rise of the People's Voice had been nothing short of meteoric. Tulsi Gabbard's political revolution had ignited a firestorm of change across the country. The old political order, the entrenched elites, the corporate interests, the war profiteers, was being dismantled piece by piece. The American people were waking up, realizing that they had been living under the thumb of an establishment that cared little for their struggles. But even as Tulsi's movement gained unprecedented ground, the stakes had never been higher. The political elites, both Democratic and Republican, were now desperate to stop her. The establishment, sensing that they were on the brink of losing everything, began to pull out all the stops to neutralize her threat. Behind closed doors, the most powerful figures in Washington plotted their next move. Corporate lobbyists, military contractors, and international leaders with vested interests in maintaining the status quo were working together to defeat Tulsi, whatever the cost. They knew that if Tulsi's movement gained enough momentum, it would be the end of their power. But Tulsi was ready. She had seen the depths of the corruption, had fought tooth and nail to expose it, and now she understood the full scale of the battle she was in. She wasn't just fighting for her political future, she was fighting for the soul of the nation. The final confrontation came during the presidential election of 2028. The entire nation was watching, the stakes higher than ever. Tulsi had already built a strong base of support, and now, she had to face off against the establishment's chosen candidate, a polished, experienced politician backed by a powerful coalition of the old guard. The election debates were a spectacle, as Tulsi's opponent tried to portray her as a threat to national security, a dangerous outsider who would destabilize the country. They called her a radical, someone who didn't understand how Washington worked. They mocked her for her outsider status and painted her as unfit to lead. But Tulsi stood her ground. She wasn't intimidated by their attacks. She had spent years fighting the same forces that were now lining up against her, and she wasn't about to let them win. In the final debate, Tulsi delivered a speech that would go down in history. She spoke with the conviction of someone who had seen the ugliness of the system firsthand but had never wavered from her commitment to the American people. "We're not here to play politics as usual," she said, her voice strong and resolute. "We're here to take back our country. We're here to end the endless wars, to stop the corporate interests from dictating our future, to bring real change. And no matter how many times they try to scare you with their lies, no matter how many times they label me a threat to national security, remember this: I am here to protect the American people, not the special interests." The moment was electrifying. The audience could feel the weight of her words, the sincerity of her vision. This wasn't just another politician making empty promises. This was someone who had dedicated her entire life to fighting for the people, and who had the courage to take on the most powerful forces in the world. The final election night arrived, and the tension was palpable. The air was thick with uncertainty. As the results came in, it became clear that Tulsi had done what no one thought possible. The people's voice had triumphed. The establishment had been routed, and for the first time in decades, a true outsider had taken the highest office in the land. Tulsi Gabbard was elected President of the United States. As she stood on the steps of the Capitol, taking the oath of office, she looked out over the crowd, her heart filled with both pride and determination. The fight was far from over. But this victory was proof that change was possible, that the will of the people could overcome even the most entrenched powers. The world had witnessed a political revolution. The old guard had been overthrown, and a new era had begun. No longer would the American people be held captive by the corrupt political establishment. Under Tulsi's leadership, the country would chart a new course, one rooted in justice, accountability, and service to the people. And as Tulsi Gabbard took her place as the 46th President of the United States, she knew that this was only the beginning. The real work, healing the nation, rebuilding trust, and making good on her promises, was about to begin. But she was ready. She had fought too hard to let anything stand in her way now. It was done. The political revolution was complete. And the country would never be the same again.